Welcome to the 1455 Summer Festival. It is my enormous pleasure to be talking to SA Cosby today. He is the award-winning author of 4 novels, Brotherhood of the Blade, My Darkest Prayer, Blacktop Wasteland, and his newest, Razorblade Tears, along with numerous short stories. He lives in Virginia with his lovely wife, Kim, and he is also my very good friend. And it is the best thing ever to be able to talk to him today about Razorblade Tears and writing in general. And he is going to do us the enormous great thing of reading for us. Mr. Cosby, take it away.
Well, thank you, Ms. Dolson. It's great to see you. As opposed to us chatting away on the phone about stories that are giving us fits. That's great. It's so nice to actually see you virtually. I keep saying that one of the things I want to do this year, if things open up and we make it to the other side of the apocalypse, is I do want to come out to Vegas and visit when the temperature isn't hell. And so
Yeah, it's not too
no,
bad.
thank you to 1455. I just want to say thank you to 1455 for having me again. This is a wonderful program. It's wonderful to be a part of it. And thank you so much for reaching out. So Razorblade Tears comes out in a little bit. And it is an interesting situation to find yourself in. 7 years ago, I was still working retail. I was a retail manager at a national hardware chain. I was writing on my lunch break, getting yelled at for writing on my lunch break, and it's an incredibly surreal feeling to go from that to actually being able to write full time and really live that aspect of your dream, and then able to live it to the fullest. That being said, publishing is a business, and there's a lot that goes into it besides the writing. Like right now, I'm currently swamped by boxes of books that I have to sign copies of. But as my mom would have said, God rest her soul, that's a good problem to have. But ultimately, it's still about the writing. It's still about writing a good story. It's still about that feeling you get when the story is really clicking on all 8 cylinders. I don't think there's any, for me as a writer, there's nothing like it. It's maybe the second most exciting time of my life, that euphoria you feel when, you get the idea, because writers, I think you can speak to this. We're our worst critics. We're self-deprecating. And you get that initial idea and like, wow, this is a really cool idea. And then you get halfway through and you're like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. What is this? What are words? How do you speak? And then if you're lucky, you push through, you rip that Band-Aid off and you get to the end and you feel like, well, not so bad, and I've been very lucky to be able to pursue that euphoria, that feeling in a way that I know is a blessing, really. So, but it's wonderful to be here speaking with you about it and talking about the whole craft and the idea of writing and everything. So I guess what I'll do is I'll read a bit from Razorblade Tears, and then we can talk about it, I guess, if you want. And then we can talk about your writing, my writing in general, the problems that come with plots that don't want to do what you tell them, and characters that won't shut up. And so, I won't say characters don't want to shut up. Characters that have something to say, and you've got to figure out how to articulate it. So, and just before I get ready to read, this is the section. This is basically Razorblade Tears is a story of 2 fathers, one black, one white, both ex-cons, whose sons are married to each other and are murdered. And at the beginning of the book, these 2 fathers, who were not accepting of their son's identity, accepting of their son's sexuality, find themselves compelled to investigate the murder when it seems like the police are not doing their due diligence. And in investigating the murder, they also are trying to achieve a modicum of redemption for the way they treated their boys. And so this is actually at the funeral. And I'll just read a little bit from that. It was a beautiful day for a funeral. Snow-white clouds rolled across an azure sky. Despite it being the first week of April, the air was still crisp and cool. Of course, since this was Virginia, it could be raining buckets in the next 10 minutes, then hot as the devil's backside an hour later. A sage green tent covered the remaining mourners and 2 caskets. The minister grabbed a handful of dirt from the pile that sat just outside the tent. The pile was covered by a weathered artificial grass rug. He moved to the head of the caskets. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, and dust to dust. The minister's voice echoed through the cemetery as he sprinkled dirt on both caskets. He skipped the part about the general resurrection in the last days. The funeral director stepped forward. He was a short, chubby man with a charcoal complexion that matched his suit. Despite the mild conditions, his face was slick with sweat. It was as if his body was responding to the calendar and not the thermometer. This concludes the service for Derek Jenkins and Isaiah Randolph. The family thanks you for your attendance. You may go in peace, he said. His voice didn't have the same theatricality as the minister's. It barely carried beyond the tent. Ike Randolph let go of his wife's hand. She slumped against him. Ike stared down at his hands, his empty hands that had held his boy when he was barely 10 minutes old. The hands that had shown him how to tie his shoes. The hands that had rubbed salve on his chest when he had the flu. Hands that had waved goodbye to him in court with shackles tight around his wrists. Rough, callous hands that he hid in his pockets when Isaiah's husband had offered to shake them. Ike dropped his chin to his chest. The little girl sitting in her lap played with Maya's braids. Ike looked at the girl, skin the color of honey with hair to match. Ariana had just turned 3 the week before her parents died. Did she have any inkling of what was happening? When Maya had told her that her daddies were asleep, she seemed to accept it without too much trouble. Ike envied the elasticity of her mind. She could wrap her head around this in a way that he just couldn't. Ike, that's our boy in there. That's our baby, Maya wailed. He flinched when she spoke. It was like hearing a rabbit scream in a trap. Ike heard the folding chair squeak and whine as people rose and headed to the parking lot. He felt hands flutter against his back and shoulders. Words of encouragement were mumbled with half-hearted sincerity. It wasn't that folks didn't care. It was that they knew these words did little to soothe the wound to his soul. Speaking those platitudes and cliched homilies seemed disingenuous, but what else could they do? It was what you did when someone died. It was as axiomatic as bringing a casserole to a repast. The crowd was thin and it didn't take long for the chairs to empty. In less than 5 minutes, the only people in the cemetery were Ike, Maya, Ariana, the gravediggers, and a man Ike vaguely recognized as Derek's father. A lot of Ike's family hadn't shown up for the service. As far as he could tell, only a few of Derek's people had bothered to attend as well. Most of the mourners were Isaiah and Derek's friends. Ike noticed Derek's family members. They stood out among the bearded hipsters and androgynous ladies that made up Derek and Isaiah's social circle. They were lean, wiry men and women with hard, flinty eyes and sun-worn faces. They wore their blue collars around their red necks. As the sermon had neared the 30-minute mark, he'd watched as their faces begin to bloom with crimson. That was about when the minister mentioned how no sin was unforgivable. Even abominable sins could be forgiven by a benevolent God. Ariana pulled one of Maya's braids. "Stop it, girl," Maya said. It came out sharp, a little too sharp. Ariana was silent for a moment. Ike knew what was coming next. That pregnant pause was the prelude to the waterworks. Isaiah used to do the same thing. Ariana began to howl. Her screams pierced the quiet contemplativeness of the funeral and rang in Ike's ears. Maya tried to soothe her. She apologized and brushed her forehead. Ariana took a deep breath and then began to scream even louder. "Take her to the car. I'll be there in a minute," Ike said. Ike, I ain't going nowhere. Not yet, Maya snapped. Ike stood. Please, Maya, take her to the car. Just give me a few minutes. Then I'll come and watch her for you and you can come back, Ike said. His voice almost cracked. Maya stood. She pulled Ariana close to her chest. You say what you gotta say. She turned and headed for their car. Ariana's cries withered to whimpers as they walked away. Ike put his hand on the black casket with the gold trim. His boy was in there. His son was in this rectangular container, packed and preserved like some cured meat. The breeze picked up, making the tassels hanging from the edge of the tin flaps move like the wings of a dying bird. Derek was in the silver casket with the black trim. Isaiah was being buried next to his husband. They died together and now they rest together for eternity. Derek's father rose from the seat. He was a lean and weathered piece of work with a shock of shoulder-length salt and pepper hair. He walked up to the foot of the casket and stood next to Ike. The gravediggers busied themselves with shovel inspections as they waited for these two men, the last of the mourners, to leave. The lean man scratched at his chin. A gray shadow of a beard covered the bottom half of his face. He coughed, cleared his throat, then coughed again. When he got that under control, he turned to Ike. Buddy Lee Jenkins, Derek's father. I don't think we ever officially met, Buddy Lee said. He held out his hand. Ike Randolph. He took Buddy Lee's hand and pumped it up and down twice, then let it go. They stood at the foot of the coffin, silent as stones. Buddy Lee coughed again. Was you at the wedding reception? Buddy Lee asked. Ike shook his head. Me neither, Buddy Lee said. I think I saw you at the girl's birthday party last year, Ike said. Yeah, I was there, but I didn't stay long. Buddy Lee sucked at his teeth as he adjusted his sport coat. Derek was ashamed of me. Can't say how much blame him, Buddy Lee said. Ike didn't know how to respond, so he didn't. I just want to thank you and your wife for getting everything straight. I couldn't afford to put him away this nice. And Derek's mama couldn't be bothered, Buddy Lee said. Wasn't us. They had things already taken care of. They set up some kind of prepaid funeral package. All we had to do was just sign some papers, Ike said. Man, was you setting up funeral arrangements at 27? I know I sure wasn't. Hell, I couldn't set up a fucking paper route at 27, Buddy Lee said. Ike ran his hand over his son's casket. Whatever moment he had imagined having was ruined now. That there tat on your hand. That's Black God's ink, isn't it? Buddy Lee asked. Ike studied his hands. The indistinct drawing of a lion with two scimitars above his head on his right hand and the word riot on his left had been his silent companions since his second year in Coldwater State Penitentiary. Ike put his hands back in his pockets. That was a long time ago, he said. Buddy Lee sucked at his teeth again. Where'd you do your time? I did a nickel out of Red Onion. Some hard fellas out that way. Met a few of the BG boys out there. I don't mean no harm, but it ain't really something I like to talk about, Ike said. Well, I mean, I don't mean no harm either, but if you don't like talking about it, why don't you get the tat covered up? Shit, from what I hear, they can do that in an hour, Buddy Lee said. Ike took his hands out of his pockets. He looked down at the black lion. The lion was standing on a crude map of the state of Virginia. Just because I don't want to talk about it doesn't mean I want to forget it. It reminds me of why I don't ever want to go back, Ike said. I'm going to leave you with your boy now. He turned and started to walk away. Hey, you ain't got to go. It's too late for me and him anyway, Buddy Lee said. Too late for you and your boy, too. Ike stopped. He half turned back toward Buddy Lee. What you mean by that? Ike asked. Buddy Lee ignored the question. When he was 14, I caught Derek kissing another boy down by the creek in the woods behind our trailer. Took off my belt and beat him like a runaway. Well, like he stole something. I called him names, terrible names. Told him he was a pervert. I whipped him till his legs was covered with welts. He cried and cried, saying he was sorry. He didn't know why he was like that. Mm. You never got into it with your boy like that? Never? I don't know. Maybe he was a better daddy than I was, Buddy Lee said. He adjusted his jaw. Why are we talking about this? Ike asked. Buddy Lee shrugged. If I could just talk to Derek for 5 minutes. You know what I say? I don't give a damn who you fucking. Not one bit. What you think you say to your boy? Buddy Lee said. Ike stared at him, stared through him. He noticed tears cling to the corners of the man's eyes, but they didn't fall. Ike ground his teeth so hard he thought his molars might crack. I'm going, Ike said. He stomped toward his car. You think they're going to catch you, did it? Buddy Lee shouted after him. Ike picked up his pace. When he reached the car, the minister was just leaving the parking lot. Ike watched as he creeped by in a jet black BMW. Reverend J.T. Johnson's profile was sharp enough to slice cheese inside of his car. He never turned his head or acknowledged Ike or Maya at all. Ike jogged down the driveway. He caught the minister before he turned onto the highway, tapped on his window. Reverend Johnson lowered his glass. Ike dropped down to his haunches and extended his hand into the car. I guess I should say thank you for preaching my son's funeral, Ike said. Reverend Johnson grasped Ike's hand and pumped it up down a few times. Oh, no need to thank me, Ike, Reverend Johnson said. His deep, rich baritone rumbled out of his chest like a freight train on greased tracks. He tried to pull his hand away, but Ike gripped it tighter. I'm supposed to thank you, but I just can't, Ike said. He gripped the hand even tighter. The minister winced. I just got to ask you, why'd you preach the funeral? Reverend Johnson frowned. Ike, Maya asked. I know Maya asked you to do it. What I'm asking you is, why did you do it? Because I can tell you didn't want to, Ike said. He tightened his grip even more. Ike, my hand. He kept talking about abominable sin over and over. You thought my son was an abomination? Ike asked. Ike, I never said that. You didn't have to say it. I might just cut grass for a living, but I know an insult when I hear it. You think my son was some kind of monster? And you made sure everybody at the funeral knew it. My boy was less than 5 feet away from you, and you couldn't shut the fuck up about how his sin was forgivable, his abominable sins. Ike, please, my hand. You didn't say nothing about him being a reporter, or he graduated top of his class in VCU. You didn't talk about him winning the state basketball championship in high school. You just kept talking about abominations. I don't know what you thought he was, but he was just... I paused. The word caught in his throat like a chicken bone. Please let go of my hand, Mr. Randolph, Reverend Johnson gasped. My son was no fucking abomination, Ike said. His voice was as cold as a mountain stream flowing over river rocks. He gripped Reverend Johnson's hand tighter. He could feel the metacarpals grinding to powder. Reverend Johnson moaned. Ike, let him go, Maya said. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, first question on my list of things to poke you about. So, through the span of your work, I've got to be privy to some of your in-process stuff, and you write about parents a lot, most often fathers, who are less than they want to be, who are strivers, who want to carve out a space for them in the world, almost at any cost. They tend to be fierce, flawed men who want to do right by their children, if only to keep up appearances. So tell me, as you're comfortable there on your couch, what are you trying to work out in your fiction? We're all working out something. What are you working out in your fiction? Mhm.
I think I'm working out. I mean, I make no secret about it. I'm very, very lucky that my father and I have a better relationship now than we did when we were kids. And I think initially I was trying to work that out. I was trying to use my writing as sort of a catharsis to deal with some old feelings about my dad and to a lesser extent my mom. I think when you're young, you don't understand the complexities of parent, husband and wife dynamics, of parents, of the strain, of the stress of being a parent. And
Right.
so, you see it in a very linear way. It's like, well, you're not here right now, so I'm angry with you. And, I'm 9 and I don't care about the consequences or the circumstances. As you get older, you learn that there's way more shades of gray and there's way more nuance to not only the relationship between your parents, but your relationship with each of your parents. And my mom, unfortunately passed a little while back, but I think she was a woman who loved fiercely, and my dad was the object of that love. And I think it was hard for her to accept that that wasn't being reciprocated the way she wanted. And so by that pain, by that hurt, it was hard for her to accept the dichotomy of him not being her husband, but still being our father. And not to let him off the hook, my dad was a very lackadaisical person. So he's still not, he's very quiet. He's kind of taciturn. He wasn't someone to really speak out and make that declaration that no, you may not be me, you and I may not be making it, but I want to start a relationship with my son. And so it was a very complex relationship growing up. And I think a lot of people's feelings were hurt because we lacked cohesive conversational skills and communication skills. Now, like I said, I am very, 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 very lucky that I was able to repair that relationship with my father and also come to understanding about my mom's situation. And so a lot of my writing is, I think I've heard this said about H.P. Lovecraft that he writes all his narrators are doomed. I think all my characters are broken men and women, mostly broken men. And if that's my claim to fame or if that's my wheelhouse, I guess I'll take it. And but I will say this: writing Razorblade Tears was less of a catharsis for me than BLACKTOP WASTELAND. BLACKTOP WASTELAND, BLACKTOP WASTELAND should probably be analyzed by a therapist, and where Razorblade Tears is more of me kind of extrapolating that idea of father-son relationship outside of my own experience and really kind of incorporating the experiences of people who I'm friends with. For all my issues with my dad, I never felt that he didn't accept me as a person, that he didn't accept me for who I was completely. I'm a heterosexual guy and he's heterosexual. And so that issue never came up. But there are people, men and women and non-binary folks who don't get that and don't receive that. And I wanted to kind of explore that through my writing. And for me, it's also a way of kind of talking about things that still may ramble around in my head, but it's a mind that I think still has a lot of ore that can be dug out of it, I think. So.
Well, I know I would have said that BLACKTOP WASTELAND is personal. I guess I feel like Razorblade Tears is even more so. Maybe it's just the way that I saw you trying to hold the subject of your book. Maybe it's just that. Maybe it is the fact that you're writing about something that's outside of your experience to some extent. I mean, whether you and you understand what it's like to not be accepted by a parent, it's I feel like there's always something that we're trying to live up to our parents, to that ideal. And if your parents aren't there or aren't giving you that, then you're trying to become the version of them that you'd wanted them to be. And, you know, as I personally can attest in failing in that attempt often. Um,
Oh
but
yeah. I
yeah,
definitely agree with that. I definitely agree with that. I think being a writer, a big part of it is empathy. I think if you're a writer without empathy, then you're not a writer. You're just somebody putting sentences together. And I mean empathy across the board. I try to have empathy for my heroes, my villains, for my side characters, for backup characters that are barely on the screen or on the page, I should say, for maybe a chapter. And so the book feels personal, but because I really tried to really deeply empathize with Ike and Buddy Lee. These, like you said, these flawed, deeply flawed men who have realized too late, that time is finite. And there's a line in the book where Ike says that he felt like the problem or the contention between him and Isaiah was like a glacier. He felt like one day he would just either he would walk across that glacier or Isaiah would walk across that glacier. And they would meet each other in the middle, on that cold plain. And what he realized was he should have just melted the damn thing, and not waited, and so I think for me it's very empathetic because again I will go back to this. My father's still alive, and my mom passed recently, but we both, and like I said, in both instances, I was able to have a really healthy relationship with them. I still have, my dad. So I think I understood the alternative to that, which is you don't get any closure, you don't get any resolution, and it's done. And so I really poured that into the book, that fear, because I think there was a part of me a long time I feared that. I feared that I wouldn't resolve the issues with my own father, and I didn't want something to happen to him. And so a lot of that was poured into the book. And so at the same time, I wanted to tell the story through the eyes of Ike and Buddy Lee because I didn't feel. I'm not saying that I won't write about LGBT characters or wouldn't have an LGBTQ character as a lead character, but for this particular story, I felt like that was someone else's truth, and I wanted to talk about these men who are, for lack of a better word, are homophobic, are prejudiced, are narrow-minded. But if you strip away all this prejudice and insecurity and broken and tragic masculinity that they clothe themselves in, at their heart, they're actually decent guys. They just don't know how to communicate it. And so for me, the book is the journey of them learning to communicate not only with the memories of their sons, but each other, and communicate in a way more healthier way. I think men, we're taught from an early age to hide your feelings, hold in your pain. Anything else is being a punk or whatever, or being soft or whatnot. And we do that, and it's such a detriment to not only ourselves, but the people in our lives. And so Ike and Buddy Lee learned through a crucible that you've got to be honest about who you are, be honest with the people in your life, and be forthright about how you feel. And so while this book is not so much emotionally personal to me, I think thematically it's very personal. And I try my best to embrace that, to tell the story.
well, I think you succeed. I think you can't help but be angry at Ike and Buddy Lee and also root for them and feel bad and obviously feel bad for his children that they were victims, but also they missed the opportunity to see their fathers say, I'm sorry, and
Yeah.
that's sad too. Um, it's just,
Oh yeah. I think, well, like you said about, I want, it's normal. I think it's natural for people to initially maybe not like Ike and Buddy Lee. And I tried to make it very apparent throughout the book that, people call them out on their BS, whatever excuses they like to make, whatever obfuscations they try to use about their prejudice. that they don't get an easy road. You know, I wanted people to challenge them because I think that would happen in real life. I think people, the book is set in like 2019 or 2018, but I think in the modern, the modern zeitgeist, people are not going to just allow you to be homophobe. They're not going to allow you to be a racist. Not going to allow you to be prejudiced. And so people would challenge them. And by challenging them, it makes them be honest with themselves. So I think initially they may come off where you may not, I don't think you hate them, but I was always frustrated with them in the first few chapters because it's like, y'all are so much better than this. Y'all pull it together. And I'm the writer, and I was thinking that. But I hope by the end of the book, I don't know if you got to come around to liking them, but hopefully you respect the journey they've gone on. I firmly believe that except for very, very rare cases, no one is beyond redemption. And the thing about redemption, though, is you have to earn it. Nobody's going to hand it to you. It's not a gift that somebody gives you all wrapped up and, with a bow on it. I like to think of redemption as a puzzle. It's somebody giving you the pieces. And then you have to put these pieces together and make it work. So you have to do the hard work of doing it. And it's not easy, but if you're able to do it, then you have something that you can hold on to. And so for Ike and Buddy Lee, unfortunately, the deaths of their sons is a brutal opportunity for them to finally redeem themselves. Because, I think it's not just about Ike and Buddy Lee, but it's about the people in their lives, people they encounter, and I think it's important for them to move forward after the last page of the book and move forward in a way that's positive in their lives and in their communities. I think it's something that they both, if you could bring them to light, would say that they need to do. And so, but it was difficult writing that book. It was definitely difficult making sure I try to hit all the right beats in a way that was compassionate but not condescending. I never wanted to come off like I was preaching to people in the LGBT community, or I was preaching to people who are maybe outside of the community but realize they have some work to do. I just wanted to tell a story that hopefully made people think.
I think you did. But the world shall see next week. Next week, my friend. How are you doing with that? You are award-winning. BLACKTOP Wasteland has done so amazingly well. I know Razorblade Tears is going to do equally as well, if not better. But you've come from, both books have sold their film rights. I mean, we're potentially be catching this on the big screen, or at a minimum on some Netflix is what I'm talking about. Cannot wait. But this is like bucket list level success, in my opinion. Is it for you? I mean, did you have the list and you've been crossing it off? Because I know you and I both made the distinguished stories and best American mystery stories in back-to-back years. I made it one and you made it the next year. And I know for me, that was like a bucket list thing. And you've gone, astronomical with your awards and all of that. I mean, are these bucket lists? Did you even think this was possible, my friend?
No, no, not at all. I think when you start out writing, at least for me, the goalpost moves as you move forward, if you move forward. So, your first thing is, I just want to get published. I don't care how it happens. I don't care whether I get paid, whether I get exposure. I just want to get published. I want somebody other than my mom and my dad and my cousin to tell me my writing is good. And so once you get to that level, then you move the goalposts again. It's like, well, I'd like to get paid. I'd like to get a nice little paycheck for a story I write. And then if you're lucky enough to get to that goalpost, then you're like, okay, maybe I like to get nominated for something, or getting Best American Mystery Short Stories and Suspense, or maybe getting nominated for an Anthony or an Edgar or something like that. And then once you move that goalpost, like I said, it's continuously challenging yourself. That being said, if you had told me 7 years ago that any of this would be happening, I would have told you got your head checked, that you have a cranial injury. Because this is beyond any dream that I had. Like I've told the story over and over again, but I'll just give the cliff notes first. I grew up very poor. As my brother likes to say, we grew up dirt floor poor. I didn't have indoor plumbing until I was 16. And, my mom was disabled. My parents separated. We lived in a trailer, like a single wide trailer. Me and my brother shared a room for a number of years until we both were way too old to be sharing a room. I've worked so many manual labor jobs. I've been a construction worker. I've been a bouncer. I've been a mate on a charter boat. I've done landscaping. I've done brick mason laborer. I've been a truck loader. I mean, I've worked, like I said, retail. And nothing wrong with those jobs at all. They're all honest work and honest living. But when you come from that kind of background, instead of say an MFA program or a family where there's more of an artistic bent than a more blue collar bent, you don't think the things that are happening right now for Blacktop and Razorblade are within your reach. You just don't. You don't think those things are meant for you. And so to see these things happening is beyond my wildest dreams. But I also hope that if somebody else sees this happening for me that may come from a similar background, then maybe that'll give them hope. If I can do it, anybody can do it. Like I said, I'm a college dropout, that has a history of bar fights and rambunctious behavior. But I'm also someone who is a student of writing, who loves to read, who loves to write and talk about writing, who's constantly trying to get better, is trying to improve the craft and keep trying to challenge myself. And so, this has just been, it's just crazy that I went from reading Devil in a Blue Dress by Walter Mosley to talking to Walter Mosley and Rachel Hozell Hall on NPR. That I went from reading, Darkness Take My Hand by Dennis Lehane to having Dennis Lehane blurb my book. That I went from, sitting in the library because I couldn't afford to pay books, to buy books, and reading, Salem's Lot or checking out Carrie, to having Stephen King say my name on a podcast. If I ever tell you that this was a plan, or if I ever say to anyone that I expected this to happen, that's obviously a sign that I've been kidnapped and I'm asking for help, because that was never, it's beyond anything I could think would ever happen, and it has just been an incredible opportunity and a blessing. And a lot about it, I think a lot of it is just being stubborn. I'm just really bullheaded. And, Blacktop, like for instance, my Darkest Prayer got 63 rejections. And it hurt. Each one of them hurt. Because when you get rejected like that, it's not, when somebody rejects your writing, it feels like they're rejecting you. And when you read the rejection and they don't think this book doesn't grab me or this isn't unique, what you really feel like somebody saying, you're not unique. You're not anything special. Your mama lied to you because you ain't special. And it hurt, but I'm so stubborn and so, pugnacious that I just kept pushing at it. It was like, I'm either going to get published or I'm going to collect more rejection letters. That was it. There was no middle ground. And I do think that you have to be a little bit obsessed with writing.
Absolutely.
To make any kind of headway. You have to be a little crazy about it because, somebody who writes a short story and gets rejected and never goes back to it, they weren't meant to be a writer. I know that sounds horrible, but I really think it's true. Because if you can give it up that easily, it never meant that much to you. And I never gave it up. I'll be 48 on my birthday. I've been sending stories out since way back in the day when you still had to have a self-addressed stamp envelope to get your story back. And I just stuck with it, and I think, I just, sticking with it and trying to get better, I think also. Like if you were to go back in time and look at the stories I wrote when I was 20, when I was 21, I'm not a genius. I'm not Stephen King. I'm not Clive Barker. Those guys, I'm not Flannery O'Connor. I'm not, I'm not Megan Abbott or Alice Walker or those people come out of the womb ready to write, that wasn't me. I needed more life experience. I needed more time on the planet to understand the intricacies of what I was trying to do, you know. But I think it all comes in due course, and I think you get the level of validation that you deserve at the time that's right for you. If all this was happening to me when I was 25, I'd be a hot mess. Oh my gosh. I'd be going viral. I'd be on Dateline, NBC, whatever happened to SA Cosby. And so it's much better now that I got it, that I've slowed down and I got some bad knees. So
we all have bad knees now, but I feel you. I feel you. So you and I have known each other, I guess 2017. That sound right? 2017 or beginning of 2018.
2017, yeah.
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 So you know, we got a drink to Kelly Garrett for introducing us.
Yes. Cheers to Kelly.
Yeah. Because you got me through my pandemic sheltering. If you didn't know, you did. Has been watching you create stories. I'm forever shaking my head on the other side of the phone at you. Always. I mean, people watching, y'all have to understand, Sean is always like, so I got to work this problem out. And we talk it through, and it's great. And it helps me because I'm thinking about my stuff and he's talking about his stuff. And then he'll be like, okay, that was that. But I got this idea for a story, a little story. And it's got like X, Y, go to Z, and then they go back to A. And, you know, yeah, I think I'm going to write that. But it's going to be set here. And I'm like, that sounds really interesting. And y'all, he will kick it out that night and be like, you know, I had like 20 minutes before I was going to go to bed, and I thought I'd write this up real quick. And I'm reading this thing forever. Doesn't matter what story it is. It's Grass Beneath Your Feet, which won him the 2019 Anthony Award. It's a Juke Jones story that's coming out in an anthology. These stories are always like 98% done. Like really, he's like, I changed some words here and there, but it's 4,000, 5,000 words of like just bloody perfection. And I'm always like,
oh my gosh.
I wrote 200 words on my phone today, Sean. I'm so happy. By the end of the year, I'll probably have a whole story. Yay! And
we all have different we all have different processes, and I tell you this all the time for anybody that's watching. First of all, I probably owe you some royalties because you really helped me. You know, there's a reason you're acknowledging both Blacktop Wasteland and Razorblade Tears, because you've been incredibly helpful to me and as a writer, and listening to me whine on the phone and, you know, late into the night about stories and characters that won't do what I tell them to do. But at the same time, I am always in awe of the meticulous nature in which you write stories, the way you put them together. You know, you put them together like a clock, piece by piece. Whereas I'm just a bull in a china shop. Here's my hammer. I'm just gonna knock stuff down and see where it lands. Where you're way more precise with it. You know, the story like Liars, Killers, and Thieves, which does so much. And if nobody knows, that's a story that Nikki wrote. It is Search It Out. Is that in Love and Other Criminal Behavior?
Nope, it's only up at Tough.
Yeah, but okay, go to Tough, which is a great online and print magazine by Rusty Barnes. Shout out to Rusty Barnes, one of the great guys keeping short crime fiction alive in the markets. But a story like Liars, Killers, and Thieves, it's great for me to be on the other end of the phone and listen to you talk about it because of the way you put it together, which is a story that accomplishes so much in like 4,000 words. You know, we get this main character who's on the run for her life, but she's in this small desert town, which this desert town could be in the middle of Red Rock West. This is a small town that could be, you know, on the outskirts of At Close Range, a movie like that. It's very cinematic stories. And I love that you are able to build these stories piece by piece by piece. So by the time you get to the end of the story, it's like a magic trick. It's like, oh my God, all this happened within a span of 4,000 or 5,000 words. So I learned from that. I take a lot of instruction from that about how to build stories or books chapter by chapter, because I believe like a lot of times I write books where each chapter is like a little mini short story. And when you really have a friend who's good at creating complex but short stories, you know, the great thing about somebody who's really skilled is they do take something that's really complex and they make it look really simple. And if you read Nikki's work, you think, oh, wow, this is pretty straightforward, but you don't see the work going on behind the scenes. So I appreciate that. As far as my own writing, like I said, it's all over the place. I mean, I have a lot of ideas, too many ideas, and that's why I have so many Google Docs that are that are synopsises. I didn't learn the plural of synopsis because I have so many synopsises that are floating around. I think because I'm just constantly trying to think of another. I just love telling stories. So I try to think of things that I think are cool or things that would be fun to talk about. Not everything's going to be a book. Sometimes it's a short story. Sometimes it's something that's going to be a novella. But I think ultimately the process for me begins with not so much the what if. Like I heard Stephen King say that. I've heard other writers say that. They think, oh, what if this happened? It'd be cool. For me, it always starts with a character, like this guy or this girl or this man or this woman. And I always think about the worst thing that could happen to them that would push them against the wall. What would make them desperate? You know, like with Bug, it's like, what would make you go back to a life of crime? Well, your business is going under and your mom needs medical care and your kids need braces and glasses and your wife wants a house that's not on wheels. And you got 30 days to come up with a plan or you're going to lose everything. With Razorblade, you know, what would make Ike and Buddy Lee, you know, become the men of violence that they once were? The worst thing I could imagine is losing a child. You know, and then like you said, you mentioned like the grass beneath my feet. You know, for that character, the worst thing in the world is to relive his, unfair incarceration. I like to write happy stories sometimes. I'm not always dark and morose. And sometimes I do try to inject humor in my stories. I think even with a story like Razorblade Tears, there has to be some humor because you can't be at the gallows all the time. And even if you are at the gallows, sometimes you just gotta laugh. And so I definitely try to inject humor, snappy dialogue. If anybody reads Razorblade Tears, Buddy Lee has a good comebacks. But I don't know. I guess I'm just obsessed with stories. And for me, it's also when I read something that's really good, I don't get mad like, oh gosh darn it, this person did that. It makes me want to challenge myself like, man, that was really good. What would I do with that? Or could I do something similar to that? Or could I do something that is on the level with this? Like I reread it. I read the original draft, but I just finished rereading Bathhouse by PJ Vernon, which is an incredible book. Yeah. And it's anybody who's listening, please pick this book up. And that book is so beautifully written. It's like he takes language and he makes it this sort of jazz fusion between terror and biting insight and beautiful Baroque phrases and sentences. And so for me as a reader and a writer, when I read something like that, it's like, wow, man, I really got to up my game. I got to try to write something like that. Like I said, I've talked about your stories make me feel that way. Kelly Garrett, David Haskell, Nobly Whedon, people like that who are really pushing the envelope of what crime fiction is. It makes me realize that I'm still on that but I'm still on that path. I'm running to reach that. I'm running to hit that high bar. Because I think ultimately all writing boils down to you're telling a story, but you're using a falsehood, or for lack of a better word, using a lie to find the truth. I think writers do think we tell lies to find the truth.
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, the truth is all that matters. I was nervous about writing Razorblade Tears because again, it deals with homophobia and LGBTQ plus issues. It deals with racism, classism. It touches on a lot of different issues. And so I was nervous about writing because I really wanted to do justice to the characters and to the issues I was talking about. So to that end, I contacted people I used as authenticity readers. I hired on people to read the book from the community that I'm writing about, and to make sure that I'm not, again, creating caricatures instead of creating characters. And I think that's very important. I think there's some people who feel like, oh, an authenticity reader or a sensitivity reader is somehow censorship. And now I think that's the first thing from the truth. It's just research. If you're going to write a book about the FBI and you had an opportunity to talk to somebody from Quantico, you would do it. It's the same thing if you write a book about a Black community in Minnesota or Minneapolis. And what does that look like? Well, you're going to talk to some people from that community. You know, it's the same thing with LGBTQ plus issues. If you're going to write about people in that community, talk to those people, understand their situation, make sure that you're representing it in the best positive possible light. That doesn't mean that it got to be positive or negative, but you want to be real. And that's what that's what I was trying to do. And hopefully that's what I was able to do.
Yeah. It doesn't cost you anything to do the research, to want to present it correctly. I mean, to get it as close as right as you possibly can, and that is the purpose of, why are you writing a thing if you don't really want to write it? If you want to make it up and
exactly
make up the entire world, then just make it up and don't pretend that you want this to be real. You know what I mean? And then also be willing to take that criticism. Yeah. You got to take the criticism too, especially if you're writing outside of what you really know. And it's
yeah. And I think so many people. I'm so great.
Yeah.
I think so many people use that as a crutch. Cancel culture. I can't write what I want to write anymore. No, you can write anything you want to write. You just got to be willing to take the consequences and repercussions that come with that. Yep. You can write about anything if you earn it. And by earning it, you have to earn it by creating competent characters, fully realized characters in situations that are not stereotypical. And I think so many people get ticked off about that. You have a lot of people, especially in crime writing community, that want to write really gratuitous, vicious gore violence. People that'll tell you, this ain't for the faint of heart, or this ain't your mom's crime fiction or whatever. And that's fine. I got a lot of violence in Razorblade Tears. But I hope that I earn that violence because I'm giving you not just Ike and Buddy Lee, but I'm giving you Maya. I'm giving you the character Tangerine. I'm giving you Jazzy. I'm giving you characters that form the basis, the foundational unit for this narrative. And then out of that, the violence comes out, because the violence means more when it happens to people you care about. Yeah. And the reason you care about people is because you create fully formed characters. I mean, you got people out here that will write a story and they just want to write about somebody getting their hair blown off and they want to get really into the minutia of blood splatter. But it doesn't matter because I never cared about the character. I never cared about that person. It doesn't hurt me. It doesn't affect me because you didn't give me anything to care about. And so I think a lot of people use that excuse for just poor writing. If we're going to be honest, I think a lot of people don't do the work. They don't do the research. They don't sit their butt in front of their computer or at their notebook and really dig into what makes their characters tick. And so then when somebody calls them out, I'm like, oh, this is kind of weak. Cancel culture. I was like, no, just bad writing. You're just being called out for crappy writing. And it bothers me because I think there are people out there that believe that that's the default. That like, oh, you're canceling me, you're censoring me. You're nobody being censored. But if you want to take on, it's like the Spider-Man thing. Great power comes great responsibility, and being a writer comes with great power as far as being a great storyteller. And so if you want to take on these very, intense subjects, you better damn sure be ready to do the work and then bear the weight of the criticism, And I think some people are just overly sensitive about it. It's like I said, again, it's a crutch for people that don't want to do the real work of writing, the real hard, heavy lifting that's required to suspend somebody's disbelief for 300 pages. I love writing and I love the craft of writing. I love the art of writing. And I think it is valuable. I think we learned during the pandemic, that a lot of people that don't give writing and art its due deference depended on books. They depended on movies. They depended on comic books to help them through this horrible, horrible situation. And so I hope that going forward, people realize how important books are to our society. And I don't say that, facetiously. I think they really are important. I think they help us embrace and empathize with people that we maybe wouldn't normally. And so it just, it means a lot to me as a writer to be able to help or to talk about things that are difficult.
Right. Yeah, the arts should be supported, should be widespread, because it is the arts that got us all through last year. I mean, how many
Mm-hmm.
endless threads on Twitter about binging this, that, and the other thing? I mean, I'm sorry. I watched with however many
Exactly.
Twitter strangers. We all watched The Undoing together, as far as I'm concerned. We're all holding hands waiting for that last episode. And you know what? The Undoing was based on a book. This is
Yeah.
it is all beautiful and wonderful, and it doesn't work for everybody, not every story, but you know what? It is entertainment, and all we're asking for is to let us entertain you. That's
Exactly. And I mean, I want to entertain people, and if you learn something along the way, that's fine too. Mary Poppins says a little bit of honey makes the medicine go down, and if you want to follow Ike and Buddy Lee on their bloody path of vengeance and see what they, the creative ways they can use a wood chipper, that's great. And but at the same time, hopefully you'll learn a little something along the way too. I think we're very, very lucky to be able to do what we do as writers. I think we're very, very blessed. And I know I am. Like I said, I know I'm very blessed. There are writers who I look up to, that I admire, who are really doing it at the top of their game. I've spoken about Kelly Garrett and Rachel Hosell Hall and Walter Mosley, and there's writers out there that are really taking it to another level. Heather Levy, I talked about PJ, Yasmin. It's a friend of mine that has a book coming out called Her Name Is Night. Yasmin McClinton. People like that are really taking it to the next level, and that's what you love to see. For me personally, it's funny. I didn't set out to be like, I don't know. It's funny because I come from the South. I come from the rural South. I come from Virginia, and there are writers. There is a whole school of thought that thinks that the literary tradition of the South belongs to a certain kind of person. There are people who will talk about William Faulkner or Flannery O'Connor, but won't talk about, like, say, Ernest J. Gaines or Zora Neale Hurston, or Alice Walker. And so I think as an African American man from the South, writing about the South, writing about rural America, it's also part of my duty to talk about that aspect of it, that the South is not the sole providence of, Confederate apologists. My family goes back, I can trace my family back to 1860 in Virginia. My great, great, great ancestors bled and sweat and cried upon every scrap of earth that every person that walks carrying a Confederate flag deigns to put their feet on. And this land belongs to us as just as much as it belongs to anyone else. And I'll be damned if I let anybody else take it away from us. We've worked too hard, literally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And so the tradition of the Southern writer is something that I really fully embrace. I think, when you read Southern writing or Southern Gothic writing, it has a certain panache because, beauty and grotesqueness exist in the same sphere in the South. Flannery O'Connor said the South is Christ haunted. I think it's haunted by Christ because despite, it being the buckle of the Bible Belt, so many actions in the past are as far from Christ-like as can be. The hypocrisy is what causes the South to be haunted. And so, there's a disingenuous moral uprightness that exists in the South that is in stark contrast to the actual history. And I feel like that's what makes Southern writing unique, because the best Southern writers, they analyze that. They bridge that gap between the past, the South's, bloody horrible past and its bright possible future. You know, Faulkner said that, you know, that great quote from Faulkner, the past is never dead. It's not even really the past. And that's so true when it comes to the South. And so the best writers in the South, whether it's an indigenous writer, an African-American writer, a white cisgender writer, or an LGBTQ writer, when you're writing from a Southern perspective, you're always dealing with those ghosts. But I do think that's what makes it even more interesting. There's a lot of stuff in Razorblade Tears that talks about race, that talks about the dichotomy between Ike and Buddy Lee. You know, on the surface, Ike is doing pretty well for himself. He's been out of jail 15 years. He did 7 years for manslaughter. He's built up a lawn care business. He was able to put Isaiah through college with that business. He was able to buy a little house with his wife. So on the outside, he's got a nice, big, fancy, dually, you know, F-250 truck. So on the outside looking in, it's like, wow, Ike's really doing, he's achieved that American dream. But like he tells Buddy Lee, it doesn't matter. You know, it's like he still gets pulled over for driving while black. He still has a hard time getting a loan in a small town that he comes from. He's still looked at by the police as this criminal who hasn't reformed, who hasn't changed. And really he has. You know, like he says, I haven't gotten more than a speeding ticket in the last 15 years. And so you look at Buddy Lee and you would think, in a small rural town, he's a white man, he's got a little trailer, he's a functioning alcoholic. So you would say, well, maybe his life is a little worse off than Ike's. And maybe in some instances it is. But Buddy Lee still has that advantage of being white. He still has that advantage of what white privilege comes from, what white privilege gives you. And white privilege is not being rich. White privilege is this. Your life may not be better because you're white, but it's never worse because you're white. And through the course of the book, Buddy Lee comes to understand that in a way that's very, I think, moving and very honest and really reflective of conversations, really deep, intense conversations I've had with people that I grew up with from the South, you know, about their privilege. And so for me, being a Southern writer is another little extra honor that I have because I feel, you know, to paraphrase James Baldwin, I love the South. I do. I love being a Southern boy. I love, you know, my past is full of, you know, Sunday afternoon dinners at my grandma's house, eating cornbread and collards and going down, swimming in the creek and hunting with my uncles and catching crawdads and crabbing and catching fish and climbing up magnolia trees to get blooms so my grandmother can make perfume with the flowers. And this incredible sense of community and family and connection to the land, to the red and black clay that, you know, coats this land. But at the same time, because I love the South so much, as I said, like to paraphrase James Baldwin, I reserve the right to criticize. I reserve the right to be honest about it and not run away from the past or the present, but hopefully look forward to a better future. And so, you know, I'm inspired by writers of the past from the South and writers that are presently a part of the New South. You know, and it's a great honor to hopefully be a part of that tradition. So, and that's something that means a lot to me.
Well, I feel like you're doing it justice. You know, you're honoring where you come from, and you're expanding that. You know, I mean, you've written fantasy. I know, you know, you mentioned religion and how it is linked to Southern literature, Southern writing. And I know the book you're working on, your Southern Gothic. You know, there's strong
Yeah.
of it in the new work. So I mean,
Yeah.
is it your goal to push to which every book to you know to pivot from the last one, or is it really just the idea that grabs you and you just have to chase it when it comes to you? Or is there a plan, Sean?
A little bit of both.
Plan.
a little bit of both. I think I want to keep, like I said, pushing and challenging myself, but I also have certain ideas that I want to get across. Razorblade Tears was a heavy book. It was a book that was, you know, it was way more, to me, way more complex than Razorblade Tears. I mean, than BLACKTOP. The book that I'm working on now, tentatively titled All the Sinners Bleed, is even more complex. But I think I'm at a place in my life where I'm ready to write this book. You know, I grew up Southern Baptist. I grew up. My grandfather was the chairman of the deacon board in my church. My grandmother was the deaconess, they used to call it, on the deaconess board. My aunt was a member of the choir. My dad sang on the choir, even though him and my mom were separated. So that always made for interesting, awkward church services. Religion is such a incredibly important foundational part of my childhood. Even as I've moved away from traditional religion in my adult life, I would probably classify myself as an agnostic now, but it's still a big part of my life because in the South, in rural areas, religion and church, I would say even more so church than religion. Church is such a big part of your life. You know, it's not just going there on Sunday. It's, you know, it's the programs that come along with it. You know, it's homecoming, it's Christmas pageants, it's the the church using like the when we do the programs to help the needy, which we were the needy. So that was a part of my life. And so, but I'm also struck deeply by a lot of the hypocrisy that exists in the Southern church and religion in the South. Not just the hypocrisy in respect to racial animus, but in respect to social interaction and the hypocrisy that exists there. The idea that certain sins all sins supposed to be equal, but we all know that certain sins get more crowd reaction during a sermon than others. Right. You know, nobody's clapping when you talk about not mixing two types of yarn or eating shellfish. You know, and so the performance art that comes along with being in a Southern Baptist, you know, or Pentecostal or church, and what does that mean? And where's the line between true religious passion and epiphany and, you know, putting on a good show? Where does that come from? Where does that line at? And so I'm working on something now that kind of talks about that, in addition to talking about policing in a small town and police brutality. Basically, the elevator pitch for the thing I'm working on now, it's about a man named Titus Crown. He's the first Black sheriff in his small hometown of Sharon County, Virginia. And on the 1-year anniversary of his election, there's a school shooting, not a mass shooting, but a school shooting. A beloved high school teacher is killed by one of his former students. That former student is then killed in a shooting with Titus's police force, which may or may not have been justified. And so Titus begins to investigate and ultimately uncovers the fact that this isn't a spoiler. He uncovers the fact that the high school teacher and the shooter and a third unknown person were a trio of serial killers, and that they've been using Sharon County as a dumping ground for a long time. And so Titus is determined to find the killer, this third person, and bring him to justice, while at the same time dealing with the complexities of being a Black sheriff in a small town, you know, with everything going on with the police, with the defund or abolish movement. And, you know, what does that mean for somebody who thinks that they can fix the system from the inside out? And what does that look like when you mix that with small town politics and religion and the complexity that come with dealing with the overwhelming power of the church? You know, it's funny. I live in a small town. I grew up in a small town of 8,000 people. And with 8,000 people, we have 22 churches. And so that tells you all you need to know about the nuances and complexity when it comes to religion and how that affects the community. And so that's something I'm working on now. So I wasn't ready to write this kind of book 5 or 10 years ago. I don't know if I'm ready now, but I'm going to try it. So we're going to see what happens.
You're ready for it. And about the church, it's like Vegas, like every strip mall, there's a church in it, but there's a storefront church every strip mall. Just bet somewhere. Their sign might be 8.5 by a piece of paper that says service on it. And you know that's where you go. You know, yes.
It's funny, man. It's funny because like, it's just funny. It's funny. Religion and church and everything, especially in the African-American community, is a very complex issue that's way smarter people than I have talked about, but I'm going to try to inject my own little observation and we'll see how it goes.
Oh, well, I know you. I've no doubt it's going to be a banger. I forgot. I honestly forgot. It was a serial killer book. Like, as much as we've talked about it, I completely spaced that aspect of it. So, yay, serial killer book. Yay. Because,
Hooray for murder.
see, this is why we're friends, because I can not just give the eyebrow about it. There's so few people in my life I can be like, yes, murder, high five.
I'm here for you, friend.
My friend, always. Well, this has been a fabulous hour of talking. Thank you so much for spending a little time with me. I'm so looking forward to getting the final copy of your new book and early drafts of your next book, because I demand. You're just the best, and I'm so happy for you, and I cannot wait to see what else you do.
Well, the feeling is mutual, my friend. I think I've said it before and I'll say it again. There are only two people I think that write about the interior lives of suburban men and women with the same level of skill and care. One of them is Megan Abbott and the other person is you. And so I can't wait to see what you do next. Write that book that we talked about.
I'm working on it.
I want to thank the 1455 summer program for having us both. Thank you so much. I appreciate being a part of this. It's an incredibly important and enriching program that really means a lot to people in we call it the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia zone. So appreciate them for having us. And again, can't wait till we finally one day meet in person. It was so nice talking to you. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
You too. Bye, friend.
All right. Bye-bye.